Imagine, like, looking at your car's dashboard, right?
Mm.
And the fuel gauge says it's completely empty. The check engine light is just glaring red.
Mm.
But the car is somehow driving perfectly fine.
Right.
Now imagine the complete opposite. The dashboard says everything is full, you've got green lights across the board, but the engine is, like, literally tearing itself apart.
Yeah, that's a terrifying scenario if you're behind the wheel. I mean, you're operating entirely blind at that point, just forced to guess what is actually happening under the hood based on, well, completely contradictory information.
Exactly. And I imagine that dashboard is your brain, and the fuel gauge is your mood.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because we have this really deep-seated assumption that our self-awareness is transparent. Like, if you feel sad, you just look inward, you see the sadness, and you say, okay, there it is, I am sad, I need to do something about it.
Right. It feels obvious to us.
But the deeper you look into the actual neurochemistry of human emotion and, the rapidly advancing technology that's designed to track it, you realize that our internal dashboard is notoriously, perhaps even fundamentally, unreliable.
It really is. And that is the core of what we're looking at today. We are essentially exploring the user manual for the human mind.
Which we desperately need.
Yeah, because we are dealing with biological systems that are so complex and so incredibly individualized that a person's own memory of their emotional state is often mathematically incorrect.
That's just wild to think about.
It is. And because of that unreliability, an entirely new field of medicine is trying to outsource our self-awareness to the devices in our pockets.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today, for everyone listening, we are opening up a stack of incredibly dense research that you sent our way for this deep dive. We're going to look at the microscopic chemical reality of how mood and cognition actually work for everyone.
Yeah, the real baseline biology.
Exactly. And then we're going to look at the cutting-edge smartphone technology, the apps, the machine learning algorithms, the hidden sensors that are attempting to monitor, predict, and ultimately control those moods.
So it's a journey from the absolute smallest mechanisms of human biology, like down to the literal space between your neurons, all the way up to what the microphone on your smartphone is secretly deducing about your mental health based on, like, the pitch of your voice.
Which is terrifying and fascinating all at once. Let's dive straight into the biology first. When we talk about mood and brain chemistry, the pop culture superstar is obviously dopamine.
Oh, absolutely. The famous one.
Right. Everyone knows dopamine.
Mm.
It's the reward chemical. You eat a piece of chocolate, you get a hit of dopamine, you get a like on social media. Dopamine. It's framed almost entirely as the currency of pleasure.
Which is a massive oversimplification, and frankly, a pretty misleading one.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, the first piece of research we're looking at really strips away that pop culture myth. Dopamine is not just about feeling good. It is a fundamental modulator of your executive functions.
Executive functions being essentially the things that allow you to operate as a functional adult in society.
Precisely. I mean, we're talking about working memory, right? Your ability to hold a phone number in your head while someone is talking to you.
Oh, which I am terrible at.
Most people are. We're also talking about shifting attention. So moving your focus from a spreadsheet to a crying child and back again without completely losing your place. And inhibitory control, too.
What's inhibitory control in a practical sense?
It's the ability to stop yourself from saying something highly inappropriate during a tense meeting.
Ah, okay. The filter.
Exactly, the filter. Dopamine is the chemical that heavily dictates your ability to execute these incredibly complex cognitive tasks.
So, if dopamine is the fuel for being a highly functioning human, my logical assumption is, just pump me full of dopamine. Give me more. If I want to be a genius, I need maximum dopamine.
Yeah.
But the research says that's completely wrong, doesn't it?
It is entirely wrong, yeah. Dopamine does not operate on a linear more is better scale. It operates on what we call an inverted U-shaped curve.
And I need a better visual for that.
Mm-hmm.
An inverted U shape is just like a hill.
Okay, let's use a different analogy. Think of dopamine like tightening a guitar string.
Okay, I'm with you.
If the string is too loose, which represents insufficient dopamine, you pluck it and it just makes a dull, flat thud.
Right.
Your cognitive performance in that state is sluggish. You can't focus. Your working memory is practically non-existent.
So you turn the tuning peg, you tighten the string.
You add dopamine, yes. You tighten the string, the tension increases, and suddenly the string rings out with a clear, perfect, resonant note. You have hit the peak of that inverted U-shaped curve.
The sweet spot.
Exactly. Your focus is razor sharp, your memory is fast, your cognitive flexibility is at its absolute maximum. This is the optimal baseline.
But if I keep tightening that tuning peg,
If you keep tightening it, introducing excessive levels of dopamine, the string doesn't sound better. It becomes so tightly wound that the pitch gets shrill, dissonant, and eventually the string just snaps.
Ouch.
Yeah, the system becomes overloaded. Your cognitive performance actually plummets. You become distractible, anxious, rigid in your thinking, and basically unable to switch tasks effectively.
So there is an absolute Goldilocks zone. Not too loose, not too tight. But here's the terrifying part of the research we dug into. That perfect tension, that exact millimeter on the tuning peg, it is different for every single person listening to this right now.
Totally. Your optimal dopamine baseline is completely unique to your genetics and your specific neurobiology. What is perfect for you might be severely hypodopaminergic for me.
Meaning too low for you.
Right. And to make it even more maddening for the neuroscientists trying to study this, the optimum level changes based on the specific task you are doing.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The exact amount of dopamine you need to do a complex algebra equation is different from the amount you need to quickly hit the brakes in traffic.
Which begs a massive methodological question. I mean, how in the world do researchers actually study the effect of dopamine on human cognition if the baseline is invisible and constantly shifting?
It's a huge problem.
Because you can't just line up 50 people, inject them with the exact same amount of dopamine, and test them. You'd be pushing some people into the perfect zone and pushing others completely over the edge.
This is where the researchers designed something brilliant, honestly. Instead of introducing foreign chemicals or, synthetic drugs into the body to manipulate dopamine, they utilized a natural laboratory that already exists.
Menstrual cycle.
Yes. They tracked 36 naturally cycling women across different phases of their menstrual cycle.
Because the menstrual cycle isn't just about reproductive organs, right? It is a massive monthly neurochemical roller coaster.
It is a profound hormonal fluctuation that has a massive cascading impact on the dopaminergic system in the brain. So the researchers broke the cycle down into 3 very distinct, hormonally unique phases to test the women's cognitive abilities.
Okay, let's walk through the exact cocktail of hormones in each phase. So phase 1 was the menses phase, early in the follicular phase. This is essentially the biological ground zero, right?
Correct. During the menses phase, the primary sex hormones estradiol and progesterone are at their lowest physiological levels.
So it's quiet.
Exactly. The hormonal environment is quiet. And this gives researchers a clean slate to understand how the brain operates without heavy hormonal interference.
Then we move to phase 2, the preovulatory phase. This is where things get loud. You have a massive, surging peak in estradiol levels, while progesterone remains relatively low.
And this is where the brain chemistry fundamentally shifts. Animal research and human functional imaging have shown that estradiol is an incredibly powerful modulator of the dopamine system. It essentially acts like a global amplifier for dopamine.
Hold on, I want to really understand the actual mechanics of that. When you say it amplifies dopamine, what is physically happening in my brain when estradiol peaks?
Okay, let's zoom all the way down to the synapse, the microscopic gap between 2 neurons. When estradiol levels spike, it triggers a multitude of changes. First, it increases the actual synthesis of dopamine.
Like your brain manufactures more of it.
Yes, exactly. Second, it increases the release of dopamine into that synaptic gap.
So there's physically more of the chemical floating around between the cells.
Yes, but doesn't stop there. Estradiol also modulates something called reuptake.
Okay, you're going to have to explain reuptake to me like I'm 5.
Sure. Imagine you spill water on a counter and you use a sponge to soak it up. The water is the dopamine, and the sponge is the reuptake transporter.
Okay, I got the sponge.
Normally, after dopamine does its job of sending a signal, the sponge quickly soaks it back up so the system resets. What estradiol does is alter how that sponge works.
It messes with the sponge.
Right. In certain areas of the brain, it can actually inhibit that reuptake. So not only is more dopamine being released, but it is staying in the gap longer, constantly hitting the receptors. It also modifies the basal firing rates of the neurons themselves.
That is a massive neurological event. So going back to our guitar string analogy from earlier, an estradiol peak is basically a biochemical hand reaching out and twisting the tuning peg tighter.
Precisely. Which means if your natural dopamine baseline was a little loose if you were sitting on the left side of that U-shaped curve, the estradiol peak tightens your string right into the perfect optimal zone. You suddenly feel sharp, focused, and incredibly capable.
But if your natural baseline was already optimal or maybe sitting on the high end, that same estradiol peak twists the peg too far. Your string is too tight, the dopamine system is overloaded, and your cognitive performance actually gets worse.
That is the exact hypothesis, yes. and that is just estradiol. The third phase they tested was the mid-luteal phase. This is characterized by high levels of both estradiol and progesterone at the same time.
And reading through the source material, I noticed progesterone seems incredibly frustrating for scientists to pin down.
Oh, it is deeply complex.
Hmm.
While estradiol has this clear amplifying effect on dopamine, progesterone is much trickier. In some animal studies, it appears to completely oppose the actions of estrogen, like it acts as a brake.
But not always.
Right, in other studies, it seems to act similarly to estrogen. Often, progesterone's impact on the dopamine system only triggers if the brain has been previously primed by estrogen. It is a highly volatile, highly individualized biochemical cocktail.
Okay, so the researchers had their three distinct hormonal phases,
Hmm.
but they still have a missing variable here. They know the hormones are twisting the tuning peg, but they still don't know what tension the guitar string started at. They need to know the baseline dopamine level of each of these 36 women, and they can't exactly crack open their skulls to check.
Historically, measuring baseline dopamine required incredibly invasive, really expensive procedures like PET scans or SPECT scans, which involve injecting radioactive tracers into the bloodstream.
Yeah, you're not doing that for a standard cognitive study.
No, definitely not. But this study used a completely non-invasive, profoundly simple biological marker. They measured the women's spontaneous eye blink rate, or EBR.
I need to stop you there, because when I read that in the study, I genuinely thought it was a typo.
Yeah.
You are telling me that the rate at which my eyelids close and open reveals the chemical state of my striatal dopamine.
What's fascinating here is that I know it sounds like a parlor trick, but it is a robust, heavily validated scientific metric. Spontaneous eye blink rate is a direct external window into central dopaminergic activity, specifically in the basal ganglia.
How does that mechanical action connect to the chemical, though?
Well, think about pathological conditions that affect dopamine. Let's look at Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's is characterized by a severe pathological loss of dopamine-producing neurons. It is a hypodopaminergic state. One of the classic clinical signs of Parkinson's is a drastic reduction in spontaneous blinking. The patients simply do not blink as often as a healthy person. Their eyes almost appear fixed.
Because the chemical driving that automatic, spontaneous motor function is depleted.
Exactly. Now look at the other extreme. Schizophrenia, in certain phases, is deeply associated with a hyperdopaminergic state and excess of dopamine activity. And clinically, these patients exhibit a significantly increased spontaneous blink rate.
So they blink way more.
Yeah, the system is overloaded, and the physical manifestation is rapid blinking. Pharmacological studies support this too. If you give someone a dopamine agonist, a drug that mimics dopamine, their blink rate goes up. If you give them an antagonist, a drug that blocks dopamine, their blink rate goes down.
That is fascinating. So the researchers basically sat these 36 perfectly healthy women down during their menses phase when the hormones were quietest and just watched them blink.
They placed them in a quiet room, instructed them to look at a cross on the wall in silence for 6 minutes, and used electrodes around the eyes to measure every single micro movement of the eyelid.
And the variance they found between healthy, normal individuals is staggering.
Yeah.
The data showed women with spontaneous blink rates as low as 2 blinks per minute, all the way up to 42.33 blinks per minute.
A 21-fold difference in baseline dopaminergic activity within a healthy population. I mean, the woman blinking twice a minute has a completely different neurological starting point, a completely different tension on her guitar string than the woman blinking 42 times a minute.
So we have the menstrual cycle phases, we have the baseline dopamine via the blink rate. Now it's time to torture them with cognitive tests.
Torture is medically inaccurate, but cognitively, these tests are uniquely exhausting. They use two classic paradigms, the N-back task and the single trial Stroop task.
Let's actually try to do the N-back task right now so the listener understands exactly how demanding this is. The N-back tests working memory and your brain's ability to constantly update information. Imagine sitting at a screen. Letters flash for 1 second, followed by a 1-second blank screen. A new letter every 2 seconds.
In the zero-back version, it's simple. You press a button if you see the letter X. It's just visual recognition.
But the one-back version requires memory. I'm going to say letters. You tell me if the current letter matches the one immediately before it. Ready? A, C, C.
Yes. The second C matches the first C.
Easy. Now the two-back. This is where it gets awful. You have to remember the letter from 2 steps ago. You have to hold a string of letters in your head, constantly dropping the oldest one and adding the newest one. Ready? T, R, T.
Yes. The second T matches the first T, which was 2 steps back.
Correct. Let's keep going. R, M, R, M.
Okay, so the first M matches the M from 2 steps ago. The final M does not, because the letter 2 steps ago was an R.
Now imagine doing that at the three-back level, trying to hold three fluctuating letters in your working memory, making split-second decisions every 2 seconds for minutes on end. And on top of that, the researchers threw in lure trials, letters that matched, but from the wrong position, say a four-back match during a three-back test, to actively try and trick your brain into a false positive.
It demands an immense amount of cognitive energy. It severely taxes your working memory capacity. And the second test, the single trial Stroop task, is entirely different. It doesn't test memory. It tests cognitive flexibility and your ability to inhibit a deeply ingrained automatic response.
The Stroop task is infuriating. You're looking at a screen. The word BLUE flashes, but the physical ink of the word is colored red.
And your brain, as a literate adult, automatically reads the word. It is a faster, more dominant neurological pathway than identifying the color.
But the instructions say, hit the button corresponding to the ink color, completely ignoring the word. So the word says BLUE, but you have to force your brain to stop, ignore the letters, look at the red ink, and hit the red button.
That requires profound inhibitory control. You are physically stopping an automatic neural impulse, and because they used a single trial design, the prompts were completely randomized. 1 second you are matching the word, the next second you are matching the color, the next second it's a neutral word like table printed in green ink.
It's chaotic.
Very. You can never settle into a rhythm. You have to be hyper-flexible.
So these 36 women are subjected to these mental marathons 3 times a month, corresponding with their hormonal phases. What did the data actually reveal? Did the hormones change their cognitive abilities?
The results were incredibly nuanced, which perfectly illustrates why the brain is so hard to study. Let's look at the working memory task, the NBAC, first. They found a general effect related to progesterone. During the luteal phase, when both estradiol and progesterone are high, the women generally had faster reaction times the higher their progesterone levels were.
So we're holding information in your head and updating it quickly. A high progesterone luteal phase was actually a benefit.
Yes, generally speaking. But the massive revelation, the true interaction between baseline dopamine and hormones, happened during the Stroop task. The task requiring cognitive flexibility and inhibition.
Break it down. What happened to the different groups of women?
Let's take a woman with a high baseline dopamine level. The woman who blinks 40 times a minute, her guitar string is already wound fairly tight. The researchers found that during the luteal phase, when her brain is flooded with that high estradiol, high progesterone cocktail, her performance on the Stroop task significantly decreased.
Because the hormonal flood acted like that invisible hand, twisting her already tight tuning peg until the string snapped.
Exactly.
The combined effect of her natural biology and the luteal hormones pushed her over the right side of the inverted U-shaped curve into an overloaded state. She lost her cognitive flexibility.
Yes. But now, look at the woman with the low baseline dopamine level, the one blinking 5 times a minute. Her string was naturally loose. During that exact same luteal phase, with the exact same surge of hormones, her performance significantly improved.
The hormones tightened her loose string right up to the perfect resonant pitch. She hit the peak of the curve. That is absolutely mind-blowing. Let's ground this in reality for a second. You can have two women working in the same office, taking the exact same difficult exam or navigating the same stressful negotiation.
Right.
They're on the exact same day of their menstrual cycle. They have the exact same levels of estrogen and progesterone in their blood. And yet, one of them is struggling to think flexibly, while the other is performing at her absolute peak entirely because of a microscopic difference in their baseline dopamine levels that is completely invisible to the outside world.
It is the definition of biological complexity. It proves that there is no universal good or bad day of the cycle for cognitive performance. It is entirely dependent on an individual's underlying unique neurochemical architecture.
This research is fascinating, but it brings us to a massive practical wall. If our biology is this messy, this highly individualized, and this invisible, how can doctors possibly diagnose or treat mood disorders?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because a psychiatrist can't have you sit in a room, measure your blink rate for 6 minutes, test your saliva for hormones, and make you do a 3-back memory task every single morning to figure out if your bipolar medication is working.
That is the great clinical dilemma, because we cannot easily, continuously measure these neurotransmitters in real time, in the real world. The entire field of psychiatry has historically relied on a completely different metric, asking the patient how they feel.
Which sounds completely reasonable, right? If my arm hurts, a doctor asks me how much it hurts, and I tell them. But when we're talking about mood, human memory is fundamentally broken.
It is notoriously unreliable. The clinical term for this is mood state associated bias, or more broadly, recall bias.
Explain how that bias actually warps our memory.
Think about human memory not as a video recording that you play back objectively, but as a story you are constantly rewriting based on your current emotional state. If a patient sits in a psychiatrist's office and the doctor asks, "How have your depression symptoms been over the last 4 weeks?" The patient doesn't give an objective summary. No. Their current mood acts as a dense, colored filter over their entire retrospective memory.
So, if I am in the middle of a severe depressive episode right now today,
Mm-hmm.
I am going to look back at the entire month through a depressed lens.
Exactly. You might have had a genuinely wonderful weekend 2 weeks ago. You went to the park, you laughed with a friend, your energy was high, but your currently depressed brain will actively minimize that memory, discount it as a fluke, or simply fail to recall it at all. It will selectively retrieve only the memories that align with your current sadness. You will honestly, truthfully tell the doctor that the entire month was miserable.
And the reverse is true for conditions like bipolar disorder, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If a patient is currently experiencing a manic or hypomanic episode where they feel euphoric, invincible, highly energetic, they might recall the past month as being a period of intense productivity and brilliant ideas. They will completely omit or forget the week they spent paralyzed by depression or the fact that their productivity involved recklessly spending their entire savings account.
So the subjective memory is fundamentally compromised by the current affective state. The patient isn't lying. Their brain is literally incapable of accessing the objective truth of their emotional history.
That's exactly right.
So doctors are trying to adjust life-altering medications based on a data set that is completely fictionalized by the illness itself. That is terrifying.
It is. And this realization forced researchers to completely rethink how we gather data. If retrospective memory is broken, we have to capture the data in real time, exactly as it happens, before the brain has a chance to rewrite it. This methodology is called ambulatory assessment, or specifically ecological momentary assessment, EM.
Ecological meaning in the person's natural environment, not a sterilized clinic. Momentary meaning right now.
In the early days, this literally meant handing a psychiatric patient a physical pager and a stack of paper diaries. The pager would beep randomly throughout the day, and wherever the patient was at the grocery store, at work, on the bus, they had to pull out a pen and rate their mood on the paper right then and there.
It sounds archaic now, but the concept is exactly what modern digital tracking is based on. The sources outline two distinct approaches to this digital tracking: active monitoring and passive monitoring. Let's start with active. Active monitoring is exactly what it sounds like. Your smartphone app pings you, and you have to physically interact with it.
It asks you to type in how you feel, rate your sleep quality from 1 to 10, log your energy levels, or perhaps move a visual slider across the screen to indicate your current level of anxiety.
On paper, the clinical value is undeniable. You are bypassing the recall bias completely. You are building an objective, time-stamped, unalterable map of a person's lived experience over months. But I have to push back on the reality of this. Think about what we're actually asking a patient to do.
The burden of active EMA is a massive focal point in the literature, yeah.
It sounds like having a clingy, overly attached friend who lives in your pocket, constantly texting you. How are you feeling now? What about now? Are you sad? On a scale of 1 to 10, how sad? The source material explicitly states that users find active tracking highly intrusive and burdensome.
And we have to contextualize who these users are. We are not talking about biohackers trying to optimize their morning routine. We are talking about individuals battling severe major depressive disorder or the extreme poles of bipolar disorder.
Right, people who are actively suffering.
Exactly. When a patient is in the depths of a severe depressive episode, psychomotor retardation can set in. Just the physical act of getting out of bed or brushing their teeth feels like climbing Everest.
And in that moment, their phone buzzes and asks them to evaluate their anhedonia on a 7-point Likert scale.
It is a profound mismatch between the technological demand and the user's capacity. The cognitive and motivational effort required to actively engage with the app multiple times a day is simply too high for someone experiencing acute psychiatric symptoms.
Which naturally leads to high attrition. The data shows people just get exhausted, silence the notifications, or uninstall the app entirely. The very people who need the tracking the most are the ones least capable of maintaining it.
Exactly. You end up with Swiss cheese data, massive holes exactly where you need information the most during the acute episodes.
So we have a biological system we can't easily measure, a human memory system we can't trust, and an act tracking system that asks too much of the patient. This is like a dead end. But this is exactly where the technology takes a massive sci-fi leap forward. The researchers realized, if asking the user to type in their mood is too hard, why don't we just let the phone figure it out on its own?
Which brings us to the concept of the digital phenotype.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break that term down because it sounds like jargon, but the implications are staggering.
In biology, a genotype is your genetic makeup, your DNA. A phenotype is the observable physical manifestation of those genetics. Hair color, height, eye color. Digital phenotyping takes that concept and applies it to our interaction with technology.
Okay, I follow.
It is the process of building an objective, observable, continuous profile of human behavior and physiological states using the passive data constantly generated by our personal digital devices.
Meaning, data that is collected without the user having to do a single thing. No sliders, no questionnaires, just living their life while the hardware sensors in their pocket silently gather intelligence.
It is the ultimate circumvention of human error and human burden. And the specific metrics they can extract from this passive data are almost unbelievable.
I want to dig deep into this because the source material mentions predicting clinical severity using something called heart rate variability. And frankly, the way they describe it sounds like chaos theory. Explain the PICHE platform study to me.
The PICC platform was a European project designed to create a personalized, wearable monitoring system for bipolar patients. Instead of just a phone, it used sensorized T-shirts garments embedded with electrodes to continuously measure physiological parameters like respiration and ECG or electrocardiogram data.
To measure heart rate variability, now most people know what a heart rate is, 60 beats per minute, 80 beats per minute. But variability is different.
Very different. Your heart does not beat like a perfect mechanical metronome. If your heart rate is 60 beats per minute, it doesn't mean it beats exactly once every 1.00 seconds. The time interval between consecutive beats is constantly fluctuating by tiny milliseconds. Sometimes it's 0.9 seconds, then 1.1 seconds, and 0.95 seconds. That fluctuation is heart rate variability, or HRV.
And why does a psychiatric researcher care about the microscopic milliseconds between my heartbeats?
Because your heart is directly controlled by your autonomic nervous system, the system that regulates your fight or flight response, which is the sympathetic branch, and your rest and digest response, the parasympathetic branch. Your autonomic nervous system is intimately physically wired into the emotional and affective centers of your brain.
So my heartbeat is essentially dancing to the rhythm of my neurochemistry.
Precisely. And a healthy, emotionally resilient brain produces a very flexible, variable autonomic response. It is constantly adjusting to microstressors. Therefore, a high heart rate variability, a more chaotic rhythm, is actually a sign of physical and emotional health. It shows a system that can adapt.
But if someone is suffering from a severe affective disorder, like depression,
The autonomic nervous system often becomes rigid. It loses its flexibility. The heart rate becomes more like that mechanical metronome. The variability drops. The PICAT platform researchers took this continuous ECG data and ran advanced mathematical analyses on it, specifically looking at something called sample entropy.
okay, stop right there. Sample entropy. I need an ELI5 on this because entropy usually means the gradual decline into disorder like a decaying building.
In this context, sample entropy is a mathematical measure of complexity or unpredictability in a time series dataset, like a long string of heartbeat intervals. A low sample entropy means the data is highly predictable, highly ordered, repeating the same patterns. A high sample entropy means the data is complex, unpredictable, and constantly shifting.
So relating that to the heart, a low entropy heartbeat is the rigid, unhealthy metronome. A high entropy heartbeat is the healthy, flexible, adaptable system.
Yes. And what the researchers found was stunning. They analyzed the long-term HRV dynamics of bipolar patients wearing these shirts. They used machine learning algorithms to map the sample entropy of the patient's hearts against their clinically diagnosed mood states.
What were the results?
When they normalized the HRV features using information from the patient's past and future mood states, meaning the algorithm learned the unique cardiovascular baseline of that specific individual, the classification accuracy of identifying the correct clinical mood state reached 99.52%.
Wait, are you serious? 99.5% accuracy. A piece of fabric with sensors measuring the milliseconds between my heartbeats can objectively diagnose if I'm depressed or manic almost perfectly.
According to that specific study's model, yes. It completely removes the need to ask the patient, how do you feel? The physiology tells the objective truth.
That is incredible, but it does require wearing a specialized sensor-laden t-shirt. The truly wild frontier is what they can do with the standard smartphone that is already in everyone's pocket. Let's talk about the microphone.
When we talk about using the microphone for digital phenotyping, privacy is obviously the first concern. It is crucial to understand that these algorithms are not utilizing natural language processing to listen to what you're saying. They aren't listening for the words, "I am sad." They are analyzing how you are speaking. They extract voice and speech features.
So they are analyzing the acoustic properties: pitch, tone, velocity.
Exactly. The source material highlights studies where researchers analyzed unstructured everyday phone calls of bipolar individuals. They found that machine learning algorithms can successfully detect the transition into hypomania just by tracking changes in voice pitch and acoustic variations.
Because when someone enters a manic or hypomanic state, their internal clock speeds up, their thoughts are racing.
And that biological acceleration physically alters their vocal cords and breathing patterns. Their speech becomes pressured, the pitch often elevates, the acoustic energy changes. The algorithm can detect these microscopic prosodic shifts during a casual phone call with a pizza delivery guy, long before the patient's own spouse might notice a change in their mood.
And the microphone isn't just listening when you are on a call, is it? It can act as an ambient sensor.
The sources outline how algorithms can use the microphone to track conversation frequency. The phone periodically listens to the ambient environment to detect the presence of human voices, not recording the words, just detecting the acoustic signature of a conversation.
And if my phone detects 0 human voices for 72 hours straight,
It acts as an objective passive proxy measurement for social isolation. And social withdrawal is one of the primary hallmark behavioral changes in major depressive disorder. Without you ever typing a single word into a mood diary, your phone has objectively logged that you have not spoken to another human being in 3 days.
that is slightly terrifying, but medically brilliant. And the passive data collection doesn't stop there. The sources list a whole arsenal of behavioral and contextual metrics the phone gathers.
The GPS is a vital sensor. It's not about tracking you for advertising, it's about spatial dynamics. How much time are you spending outdoors versus indoors? Are you traveling your usual route to work and the gym? Or has your geographic radius abruptly shrunk to just the distance between your bedroom and your kitchen? A shrinking GPS radius is a massive red flag for a depressive episode.
Then you have the accelerometers and gyroscopes. They measure physical activity.
They can distinguish between someone who is active, someone who is lethargic, or someone who is experiencing agitated psychomotor activity pacing frantically, which is common in mixed affective states.
And finally, the phone knows exactly how you interact with it. Your screen on time, how many times you unlock it, the speed of your typing. If my phone sees that I am suddenly unlocking the screen 200 times a night and doom-scrolling social media at 4:01 a.m., it can infer that my sleep architecture is completely destroyed.
And disrupted sleep is one of the most reliable predictors of an impending manic episode in bipolar disorder.
So you have all these data streams: vocal pitch, social isolation, GPS radius, physical activity, sleep disruption. But a single data point doesn't mean much on its own. If I stay home all weekend and don't talk to anyone, I might just be tired, not clinically depressed. How does the system differentiate?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the magic of digital phenotyping lies in time series analysis and machine learning. These systems don't just look at a snapshot, they continuously monitor these parameters over months. By doing this, the algorithm learns your unique intrinsic baseline.
It builds a mathematical model of normal for me.
Exactly. It learns that your normal GPS radius is 15 miles, your normal voice pitch is X, and your normal sleep duration is 7 hours. Once it has that baseline, the machine learning model looks for the covariance of these parameters. It looks for subtle individualized pattern where multiple variables shift simultaneously in a specific direction.
So if my sleep drops by 2 hours, and D, my typing speed increases by 15%, and D, my voice pitch elevates slightly, the algorithm recognizes the mathematical fingerprint of my specific brand of hypomania.
And it flags it. It essentially predicts the mood swing before the patient has consciously registered a shift in their emotional state. It is an objective, early warning radar system for human emotion.
When you lay it out like that, it sounds like the ultimate medical triumph. We have bypassed the subjective lies of human memory. We have bypassed the exhausting burden of active tracking. We have a pocket-sized supercomputer that knows our neurochemistry better than we do. It feels like we have finally cured the diagnostic muddy waters.
It does feel that way. which makes the clinical data we are about to discuss so incredibly jarring.
This is where we hit the efficacy paradox. We have this miraculous technology, but the ultimate question in medicine isn't, is the tech cool? The question is, does it actually make the patient better? Do these mood tracking interventions actually decrease the severe symptoms of affective disorders?
The listener provided a source that addresses this exact question. It is a rigorous, comprehensive, systematic review and meta-analysis of digital psychiatric tools. It aggregated data from 12,230 participants across 8 randomized controlled trials. These are gold standard clinical studies designed specifically to test if digital mood monitoring interventions reduce the symptoms of depression or mania.
And the results of this meta-analysis are a massive bombshell.
They are highly counterintuitive. You would expect that with all this granular insight, with early warning systems and objective data, patients would be significantly healthier. But the statistical reality of the trials showed otherwise. The effect of these interventions on decreasing bipolar depression was negligible. Statistically, it was close to zero.
Wait, all this tracking, all this machine learning, and it had almost zero effect on bipolar depression.
Correct. And the results for mania were equally disappointing. The meta-analysis found a very small effect on decreasing mania symptoms, but it was not statistically significant, meaning it could have just been random chance.
What about unipolar depression, a standard major depressive disorder without the manic swings?
For unipolar depression, the results were slightly better, but only barely. There was no effect at all at the 6-month mark. At the 12-month mark, there was a borderline small effect. Furthermore, across all conditions, there was absolutely zero robust evidence that mood tracking decreased the rate of relapse or prevented hospital readmissions.
I am genuinely struggling to wrap my head around this. You just told me that the system can predict a manic episode with 99% accuracy. How can an intervention have perfect diagnostic foresight and completely fail to reduce the symptoms or keep the patient out of the hospital?
This raises an important question, right? It is the ultimate paradox of this technology, and it raises a fundamental question about what these apps are actually doing.
Because despite this clinical failure, these apps are massively popular. The sources note that Bipolar UK's mood tracker has over 10,000 downloads on Android alone. Apps like eMoods, Mood Notes, Galio. Millions of people are voluntarily logging their moods every single day. If they don't work clinically, why is everyone using them?
We have to reevaluate how we define efficacy. The meta-analysis looked for a direct causal relationship. Does using the app directly cure the disease? And the answer is no. But qualitative research interviewing the actual users of these platforms reveals a completely different kind of value.
The users aren't looking for a cure in the code.
Exactly. The apps are not a pill. They do not introduce a chemical into your brain to fix the dopamine imbalance we talked about earlier.
They are a mirror.
A profoundly accurate mirror. A mirror doesn't heal a cut on your face. It just shows you the cut so you can bandage it yourself. The primary value identified by the patients in these studies is the development of something called mental literacy.
Mental literacy, meaning understanding the grammar, the vocabulary, and the hidden rhythms of your own mind.
Precisely. When users engage with these tracking platforms, they gain insights that are otherwise impossible to see because of that recall bias we discussed. They use the long-term data to discover highly personalized triggers.
Give me an example of how a patient uses that data in the real world.
A user might look at 6 months of their mood graphs overlaid with their sleep data and realize, I only experience severe suicidal ideation on weeks where I have slept less than 5 hours for 3 consecutive nights. Or a bipolar patient might look at their data and realize, every single time I enter a hypomanic phase, it is immediately preceded by a week of intense, unusually high social activity and travel.
They're finding the causal links in their own lives that a doctor might never spot.
Exactly. And another massive psychological benefit identified in the qualitative studies is the realization of impermanence.
I can understand that entirely. When you are in the black hole of a depressive episode, it feels eternal. Your brain convinces you that you have always felt this way and you will always feel this way. Hope is biologically erased.
But when you can open an app on your phone and look at an objective mathematical graph that clearly shows you were feeling joy, or at least contentment, just 3 weeks ago, it breaks the illusion of the depression. It provides undeniable empirical proof that the mood is a cycle and that it will eventually shift again. It gives the patient the endurance to survive the current episode.
So the app doesn't lower the clinical symptom score on a standardized test, but it keeps the user alive and fighting. The sources call this secondary prevention strategies. The app provides the insight, but the human takes the action.
That is the crucial pivot. Once a user sees a dip in their objective mood data or receives an early warning flag from the passive sensors, they initiate their own self-management protocols. They are empowered.
They see the data trending toward mania, so they take agency. They actively cancel social plans to reduce stimulation. They consciously enforce a strict sleep hygiene routine. They temporarily hand their credit cards to a trusted spouse. Or they proactively call their psychiatrist and say, "My data is showing early warning signs. I think we need to adjust my medication before I end up in the hospital."
The app is the dashboard warning light. It alerts the driver to a problem, but the driver still has to be the mechanic who pulls over and fixes the engine. The technology does not perform the healing, it facilitates the user's agency to heal themselves.
Which fundamentally changes how software developers and psychiatrists should be building these tools. If the goal is no longer to be a digital pill that magically cures the patient, but rather a secure, reliable mirror that empowers self-management, how do we actually design the perfect mood app?
That brings us to our final synthesis. Because building this mirror is incredibly dangerous if done incorrectly. The source material is very clear that mood tracking is not a benign activity. It carries genuine psychological risks.
Let's talk about those risks. How does looking in the mirror hurt you?
For certain individuals, particularly those prone to anxiety or severe neuroticism, constantly being prompted to evaluate their emotional state forces them to hyperfixate on their illness. Instead of gaining helpful insight, they just dwell on their negative symptoms. The act of tracking itself becomes a stressor. It induces rumination.
You are forcing them to stare at the cut on their face all day, every day, until that cut is the only thing they can think about. The sources also mentioned a digital placebo effect, but reading between the lines, it sounds more like a nocebo effect.
A nocebo effect is exactly right. If a patient checks their app in the morning and the algorithm based on their sleep and typing speed predicts that they are entering a depressive state, the patient might subconsciously fulfill that prophecy. They might think, well, the supercomputer says I'm depressed today, so I guess I am. And they lean into the lethargy, exacerbating the very symptoms the app was trying to prevent. It makes them feel perpetually like a patient rather than a person.
So, knowing the risks of rumination, the nocebo effect, and the burden of active tracking, how do we build the ideal intervention? The systematic reviews in the sources lay out a very specific blueprint.
The first pillar of the ideal mood app is total customizability. Because we know that active tracking the EMA prompts is exhausting, the user must be in complete control of the interface.
Can't be a one-size-fits-all rigid questionnaire.
Exactly.
Right.
If a user finds a 1 to 10 slider scale overwhelming, they should be able to toggle it off and use a simple binary thumbs up, thumbs down system or a daily emoji. They must be able to control the notification frequency. If they want to track 5 times a day during a medication change, great. If they want to turn off all active notifications on the weekends to just live their life without being reminded of their illness, the app must allow that. The intervention has to mold to the user's life, not force the user to mold to the intervention.
And who exactly should be using this ideal app? If we give a hyper-customizable, data-heavy app to someone who is currently in the middle of a screaming manic episode or completely paralyzed by depression, they aren't going to use it.
Which is why the data suggests we are targeting the wrong phase of the illness. The ideal target population for these digital interventions is asymptomatic individuals.
People who are currently feeling fine.
People who are in a period of relative stability, but who are naturally at risk of relapse due to the chronic nature of their condition, and importantly, people who have a high degree of clinical insight into their illness. The goal is to use the app during peacetime to map the baseline and catch the earliest tremors of an impending episode, rather than trying to use it as a life raft when the user is already drowning in an acute phase and too overwhelmed to engage with the screen.
That makes perfect sense. Establish the baseline when the baseline is actually normal. Now, what about the software itself?
The sources bring up a point that I think anyone who has ever owned a smartphone can relate to. The tech has to be flawless. It sounds like a trivial complaint, my app crashed. But in the context of psychiatric care, a crashing app is a clinical failure.
Imagine you are relying on this app to be your early warning system. You trust it to tell you if your mind is slipping, and then the app freezes, or the Bluetooth sensor on your smart t-shirt disconnects, or the battery drains completely halfway through the day.
It doesn't just annoy the user, it actively destroys the therapeutic alliance. The user loses trust in the system. If they can't trust the app to sync properly, how can they trust its algorithmic prediction of their mental health? This unreliability is a massive driver of attrition. People simply delete the app. The technology, especially the passive sensors, has to be entirely invisible, frictionless, and absolutely reliable.
And finally, the blueprint addresses the human element. For all the talk of sample entropy, machine learning, and acoustic vocal analysis, the ideal app cannot exist in a vacuum. You can't just hand someone this incredibly powerful diagnostic tool and say, "Good luck, figure it out."
The onboarding process is critical. It cannot just be an automated swiping tutorial with a cartoon mascot. Integrating a patient onto a complex digital phenotyping platform requires initial face-to-face support from a trusted human being, a clinician, a psychiatrist, or a trained peer support worker. They need to help the user interpret the initial data, set realistic personalized goals, and build those secondary prevention strategies.
And when it comes to the data itself, the sources hit incredibly hard on privacy. The ultimate goal for the medical field is coordinated care, where my phone's passive data feeds directly into a dashboard on my psychiatrist's computer so they can monitor me remotely. But that creates a massive power imbalance.
Which is why the final pillar of the ideal app is absolute user control over data security. If a patient feels like their phone is a surveillance device, or that their location data and voice analysis could be used against them, perhaps to involuntarily hospitalize them, they will immediately abandon the platform. The user must own their data. They must be able to revoke a clinician's access at any time. They must feel entirely safe, or the entire system collapses.
So taking all of these recommendations from the literature, the ideal mood monitoring intervention is an incredibly delicate balancing act. It harnesses the objective, granular, invisible truth of passive smartphone sensors, combines it with the subjective, highly customizable active confirmation of the user, and wraps it all in a secure, human-guided framework that prioritizes the user's mental literacy and agency over an immediate clinical cure.
It is a profound paradigm shift. We are no longer trying to fix the patient with technology. We are giving the patient the tools to read their own deeply complex diagnostic X-ray, empowering them to navigate their own biology.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. This really has been a journey from the microscopic to the macroscopic.
We started by dismantling the myth of dopamine, revealing how intricate hormone-driven fluctuations during the menstrual cycle drastically alter our cognitive abilities, proving that our biological baseline is a shifting, highly individualized target.
Then we explored the massive clinical roadblock of human memory, the recall bias that makes our own retrospective assessment of our moods fundamentally untrustworthy, which led us to the exhausting, intrusive, but necessary world of active ecological momentary assessment.
From there, we stepped into the truly sci-fi frontier of digital phenotyping. We saw how machine learning algorithms analyzing the sample entropy of our heartbeats, the acoustic pitch of our voices, and the geographic radius of our daily movements can objectively predict our emotional states with staggering accuracy.
And finally, we confronted the efficacy paradox. The realization that despite this Orwellian predictive power, the technology fails to directly cure the symptoms. Its true power lies in acting as a mirror, building our mental literacy, and forcing us to take agency over our own minds. It provides the dashboard, but we still have to drive the car.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, there is a lingering implication in all this research that we haven't fully addressed.
A final provocative thought.
Lay it out. We have clearly established today that human recall is incredibly flawed. Our subjective memory lies to us about how we felt last week. And we have also established that machine learning algorithms, processing thousands of passive data points from our phones every second, are becoming objectively better at detecting our true emotional states than our own conscious minds.
The phone knows I am entering hypomania before I do.
Exactly. So the question we have to ask ourselves as this technology becomes mainstream is this. As our devices become mathematically, objectively better at knowing how we feel than our own internal senses are, will there come a day when we completely outsource our emotional self-awareness to a screen?
Will you wake up, completely bypass your own internal check-in, and simply look at an app to tell you if you are happy today? And more importantly, if your internal gut tells you that you feel great, but the 99% accurate algorithm on your screen says you are clinically depressed, which one will you actually believe?
It is the ultimate diagnostic muddy water. When the digital fuel gauge tells you you're empty, but you feel full, who do you trust? Your biology or the algorithm?
That is a deeply unsettling, yet entirely inevitable question. Something to seriously mull over the next time you mindlessly unlock your smartphone and let the sensors start gathering data. Thank you for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive. We've unpacked the machinery of the mind and the tech trying to decode it. Remember, while your phone might hold all the data, you still hold all the power. Catch you next time.